Hello guys, we're back with Of Wizards and Heroes. I've been away forever. I had to watch a little bit of my last video to remember where we were, but you don't need a recap. Of Wizards and Heroes is by storyforsomeone. It can be found on AO3, and this is Chapter 6, A Test of Character. Teleportation, they had said. Mutant, they thought. This was something else entirely. Harry moved like a storm in their midst, a small figure wielding abilities beyond comprehension. The onslaught of bullets suddenly transformed impossibly into a flock of birds. Their weapons burned hot in their grasp, and the agents dropped them with a cry. A shockwave rippled out, leaving toads where men were standing. The ground suddenly turned sticky and sluggish beneath their feet, the very earth shifting at his will. Even the elements obeyed his command. Wind and water and great spouts of fire took the shapes of strange mystical creatures, and everywhere great multitudes of light, reds and blues and purples and ambers that streaked across the sky like fireworks, a kaleidoscope of Stupefy and Impedimenta and Expelliarmus and Confringo and a Reducto that left a trail of unconscious and somewhat stunned agents. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before, and it terrified them. Hill, I need you to send out a distress call now, level 7. Level 7? But I know who it is, Fury growled. Just do it, as many of the team as we can spare. Yes, sir. Within the bubble of the calm, at the center of the chaos, Thor was staring at Harry with an astonished, almost wary expression. What are you? Harry paused where he was sending off an oak tree to go chasing after some agents who had gotten too close. Would you be disappointed if I said human? From his position on the ground, Loki gave a half snort. He's not lying, brother. Of course, whether or not he's mortal remains to be seen. Then why are you attacking S.H.I.E.L.D., Thor demanded. They protect people like you. Protect? Harry sent a blasting charm behind him, where the agents were rallying for another attack. They flew a good 50 feet in the air and instantly knocked unconscious when they hit the ground. Harry paused. Okay, maybe he was overpowering things a tad too far. They were only muggles after all. He scowled. If stalking and shooting at me is how they protect people, I dread to even think of what their offensive looks like. The two glanced up fleetingly as a rain of bullets rebounded off Harry's shield. Surrounding agents cried out, "It's the very same shots fired back towards them." And you are not proving them right, Thor said, tearing his gaze away. If they weren't afraid of you then, they certainly will be now. Yeah, well, they should have thought of that before they shot your brother. Doesn't that count for anything? A muscle in Thor's jaw twitched. My brother has a lot to answer for. The people of this world have been done a great wrong. From where I'm standing, so has Loki. Loki is not all that he seems, magician. And then Loki pushed his wet hair off his forehead to reveal his scar, the blinding light of spells reflecting fiercely in his eyes. Neither am I. And just then and there was a shrieking wail of another jet engine, and a second smaller plane appeared in the air above them. Numerous figures began dropping from the sky towards him, and Harry quickly checked that his wards were still in place. A faint golden shimmer glinted reassuringly around him. He noticed that regular agents were retreating and making the way for new arrivals, and seemed only too happy to get out of Harry's range. Harry's eyes narrowed. All at once the air cleared and the storm seemed to dissipate around them, and Harry was left staring at the oddest assortment of people standing before him. A large green man took up primary attention at the forefront of the group, flanked by a guy who looked frighteningly patriotic in red and blue, and an archer Harry distantly recognized. Ah, yes, the assassin, Harry thought dryly. Nice to finally meet you. Two others joined the group, Thor and... Was that Natalie? So this was who she worked for. Harry wasn't exactly surprised. He had been an unspeakable for a while back home, and the life of a secret agent was easy to recognize once you had lived it yourself. You know, Red, Harry called, when you said you blew things up for a living, I didn't think you meant it literally. And I never realized your interest in science went far behind the theoretical side, she replied evenly. Harry couldn't help it. Even now, he grinned. Ah, but magic is just science we do not understand, although I've always thought it was the other way around myself. All right, All right, enough chit-chat, the guy with the shield stepped forward. Look, Harry has it, we're not the bad guys here, but if you continue to fight us, you'll be making an enemy you really don't want to make. Trust me. So far, you've been doing that pretty well all by yourself. I don't take kindly to people stalking me and shooting my friends. The archer's face seemed to spasm for a minute at the word friend as he glanced at Loki hatefully, who was stumbling to his feet with a hand pressed against his side. Harry quickly caught Loki round the waist as the man swayed on his feet. The captain spoke again. Hand Loki over, come quietly with us, and no one has to get hurt. Harry's expression hardened. Forgive me, but that's not really my choice to make now, is it? He turned to Loki, and his voice dropped. Can you get yourself out of here? The god looked at him strangely. Why are you helping me, magician? Do I need a reason? Loki's eyes drew together in confusion, but he answered all the same. Human weapons are meddlesome, but not lethal to us. All my magic, however, is focused on keeping the bullet from hitting the subclavian vein. I'm not at capacity to teleport. Harry cursed under his breath. And if I disappear, they'll all freak out and blame your brother. Just do as they say, Loki said blithely, ignoring the brother statement. It's not like I can't escape any time that's convenient. Harry looked unconvinced. You can't run forever, magician. S.H.I.E.L.D. may be overbearing, but they control this world. If you want to stay here, you must learn to adapt. Harry sighed and looked at Captain. All right, but he needs a healer, not a prison cell. The big green thing snorted, and though it sounded more like a growl, and lumbled forward. Upon reaching Harry's words, the creature yelped and stumbled backwards. Harry rolled his eyes and reluctantly brought them down with a wave of his hand. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught the captain staring at him incredulously. The grey man ambled towards him, and Harry found himself suddenly feeling very small. His hand was still on his wand, and he carefully handed Loki over. As soon as he left Harry's grasp, it was like the secret symbol had been given that made it safe for the agents to rush and clamp down handcuffs on Loki's wrists, and the ridiculous mask across his face. Loki flinched. Careful! Harry snapped. The green creature sniffed and threw Loki over his shoulder before leaping straight over Harry's head and landing an impossible distance away. Harry turned back to the group. So now what? Do I get handcuffs too? No, the archer was speaking, Fury's voice in his ear. You get one of these. Clint, no! Natalie's cry burst out a warning too late, and quicker than the eye could see, he knocked an arrow and let it fly straight at Harry. There was no time to dodge, no time to muster a spell or put his wards back up. Stupid, he had played right into his hand. Harry could watch only with growing dread as he watched his death come speeding towards him for a second time. In his thoughts a panic massive, no, damn it, not now, I'm not finished here. The arrow froze in mid-air. Time seemed to stand still. Something, or rather someone, had come between them. And from across a distance, Loki stared at the small girl who had materialized, something he had never thought he'd see again. Her name was but a whisper on his lips, but it seemed to tremble in the air. Hela? Harry stared at the figure in front of him. The girl was young, a child almost, but her face had a kind of timeless quality that made it impossible to guess her age. Her eyes were sharp and deductive, underpinned with something ancient, haunted. They reminded him somewhat of Loki's. Well met, Harry James Potter, she said, and her voice was that of the high trilling tones of a child. It gave her words an almost ominous quality. Harry started. How do you know my name? How do I know anything? She said dryly. I am a watcher, the guardian, the open at the close. Harry's eyes widened. Your death. One version of her, anyway. Your world's death was frightfully dull. All evil, cackling and lurking under bridges. Talk about living up to the cliché. Harry got to the impression that she was teasing him somewhat. It's nice to finally meet you, though, the famous master of death. It's not every day you get to meet someone who can outwit the powers of life and death itself. Believe me, that was never part of the plan. Of course it wasn't. That was the critical point. You can't go looking for power like that. Harry stifled a groan. More riddles. So don't get me wrong, I'm grateful you stopped the arrow, but you don't know why. Death has never intervened before. Harry nodded, and the girl sighed. It's because of him. She pointed, and Loki followed her gaze to see Loki staring at them both. Loki, you saved his life. Well, I wouldn't exactly go that far. Nevertheless, you stood by him when no one else could. That takes invention. Thank you? A life debt has been paid. Your actions today will not be forgotten, Harry Potter. Then a faint tremble shimmered through the air, and her image began to fade. Wait! Harry called as she paused. Why him? Why Loki? And the girl looked at the god of mischief with an ancient, helpless sort of longing. Because he's my father. And then she was gone. When Harry looked again at the Avengers, he saw Thor opening and closing his mouth in a very good impression of a fish. Was that she? You? Harry ignored him and glared at the archer. You shot me. Without consciously thinking it, his magic swarmed up and formed a switching spell on the bow. So Agent Barton now clumped a lump of rock. The bow clattered to the ground next to Harry, who picked it up. At the same time, the arrow that had been meant for Harry once rose into the air, and then suddenly there were 10 hundreds of arrows, all trembling in midair, straining against Harry's grip. A wave of Harry's hand, and they all pivoted, narrowing their paths so that to the one who had fired the first. Clint took an involuntary step back, eyes widening. Harry's eyes were burning a brilliant steely green. He clenched his fist with a shudder, and all the arrows shot towards the archer. This time Clint stumbled, mind going blank with panic as he saw the impossible array of arrows shooting towards him. He raised his hand to cover himself, bracing himself for impact. Silence. He opened his eyes and froze. Every single arrow had stopped about an inch from his body, quivering as though straining to break through and pierce his skin. Arrow after arrow stopped around him, and they were all hitting an invisible wall, until Clint found himself in a cage of deadly points. So much for talking, huh? Harry's voice had gone cold. The arrows pressed closer. The archer swallowed. He didn't dare move. It was then that the Avengers broke from their stupor and actually remembered, right, we're supposed to be helping fight this guy. And then without a constant decision from either side, suddenly they were all fighting. A mass of frenzied spells and enchantments that lit up the sky and fireworks as the Avengers attacked before they knew what they were doing. Half of them didn't even know who they were fighting. Harry in the center, weaving a web of magic into the earth and sky, blasting agent after agent away with a careless flick of his wand, leaving behind a trail of unconscious, obliviated, stunned, and, oddly enough, transfigured agents in his path. Steve, as he struggled to get past the dare he believe it trees that suddenly sprang to Harry's aid, Natasha as she attempted to cut down the cage of arrows trapping Clint, Loki as he was struggling to get away from the Hulk, icy swirls of frost billowing from his palms. Thor tried to defend him. It was chaos. Then, absurdly, the air erupted in the sound of "Back in Black," and a small red and glowed figure appeared in the sky. Harry stared. Was that a muggle flying? The captain glared at the flying figure. "About time, Tony," he yelled into the sky. "We could use a little help down here." Tony? The robot figure landed with a thud, and his mask lifted up to reveal a very familiar face. Honestly, Tony drawled, "I leave you alone for 5 minutes," and he stopped when he caught sight of Harry's face. "Harry?" he said incredulously. "What the ruddy hell are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." "Well," he gestured vaguely to the suit in the kind of ta-da motion, "I'm Iron Man. You know, funnily enough, I had figured out that much for myself," Harry said dryly. "And for the record, I'll still say it's a stupid name. There's no iron in that suit." Tony looked offended. "It's a brilliant name. It's a provocative, romantic image, and you know it." Harry's eyes twinkled. "It's obviously some sort of gold titanium alloy reinforced with carbon nanotubes." "Okay, hold up." Steve held up his hand, his expression slack. "You guys know each other?" Tony's lips twitched into a hint of a smile, and he turned to the Avengers. "Does someone want to explain what the fuck's going on?" "That is the Harry Stark," the captain said curtly, still looking between them a little uncertainly. "Our target?" "Target? Harry's no more of a target than I am, so I would appreciate it if you would stop trying to blow him up." "He's dangerous," Barton insisted. His scowl could be seen through the small gap that was made in the arrow cage. "He's my friend." "We have orders," the captain said stubbornly. "And how often do we actually follow them?" Tony shot back. "Come on, guys. He saved my life." Tony looked up sharply. His eyes met with Tony's, and he knew he was thinking of the night they had met, thinking about what had happened if Harry had not walked into the bar that night. The confession seemed to mollify the Avengers somewhat, but they were still looking at him in suspicion. Of course, it was that moment, as Thor and Banner were still at each other's throats, that Thor got a little too enthusiastic with Mjolnir, and the great hammer rebounded off of Hulk and was sent flying towards them. More specifically, straight towards Natasha. She froze. Harry didn't think. Dropping his wand, he focused on the hammer and pulled with everything he had, feeling the magic rise up around him. Like a wandless Accio throwing out his hand and running towards Natasha. The air shuddered, and the very fabrics of reality trembling as as one ancient power recognized another. Then, impossibly, the hammer swerved. Harry leapt at the final distance, and his hand closed around Mjolnir in midair, plucking it from its path like he would a snitch. The world seemed to shiver around him, and then his feet hit the ground, and Harry let out a breath. Mjolnir was still firmly held in his hand. Harry lifted it up and studied it curiously. It was a lot lighter than it looked. The weapon felt almost buoyant in his hand, and looking closely, Harry saw it was pulsing slightly with glowing runes. The hammer almost seemed alive. Harry grinned. Fascinating. Absorbed as he was, Harry noticed that it had gone utterly silent around him. He glanced up, and everyone was staring at him, mouths agape, as though he had just announced that he was a messiah or something. It was almost comical. Thor, in particular, looked fit to pass out from shock. Harry raised an eyebrow, flipping the hammer carelessly in his hand with natural ease. Was it something I said? Wow, my throat is sore, and I only read for like 15 minutes. Goodness. Well, I will see you guys later. Bye.